Hello and welcome to Uncle Matt's Online Academy. Today we are going to be talking about laws of motion, and we are going to be looking at the following: introduction to motion, that is, we are going to be looking at the concept of motion, and we look at the first law of motion, the second law of motion, the third law of motion. We talk about impulse, we talk about principle of conservation of energy, we talk about inelastic collision, elastic collision, and application of the laws of motion. Now, motion means, or a body is said to be in a state of motion if the body changes its position with respect to time. Now, what this means is that at different time, the body will be found at different locations. So if you find the body if at time t1, the body is found at a location x1, if the position is x1 when the time is t1, if time changes to t2, you are going to find the body at another position. Let's call it x2. Now what this means is that if the body is seen at time 5 minutes at position x1, if the time changes to 10 minutes, you are not going to see the body at the same position. It would have changed to another position, let's say x2. So this is it about motion. And the person that gave us most of the laws that help us to explain the concept of motion is a scientist called Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, he gave us three laws that help us in explaining the concept of motion. We call them first law of motion, second law of motion, and third law of motion. Now let's look at some of the laws. The first law of motion. The first law of motion tells us that if a body is at the state of rest, if a body is resting or is moving with a constant motion, that the body will continue to rest or move at that constant speed or constant motion, unless an external force is applied to it. Now what this means is that if you allow someone to continue resting, if you place someone in a comfort zone, the person will tend to continue to rest in that comfort zone, or else the person is being pushed. And that is why in our everyday life, we tell people to move away from their comfort zone. The comfort zone is a place you are enjoying and you don't want to live there. Naturally, most things tend to continue to enjoy the place they are, or else something pushes them to come out from it. So the first law of motion is the law that gave us the idea to always move out from our comfort zone. If you don't move out from your comfort zone, you won't change and you won't do some things or achieve some things you plan to achieve. Now this law of motion, this first law of motion is also called the law of inertia. Why? Because inertia means the ability of a body to continue to rest or to stay in a constant motion. So if someone is always or doesn't want to change, or a body is always at the state of rest, you can say that the body is in a state of inertia. Somebody that is not changing, that's always one place, you can say that the person is at the state of inertia. So we can also define first law of motion as this, that a body will continue in a state of inertia, since inertia actually means resting or staying in a constant motion. So we can say that a body will continue in a state of inertia unless an external force is being applied. So that is the first law of motion. It is also called the law of inertia. Now let's look at the second law of motion. The second law of motion states that the force applied to a body to move it is directly proportional to the rate of change of momentum, and that the body will move to the direction of the applied force. Remember, a body will continue to rest or stay in a constant motion or else an external force is applied. That is the first law. Now the second law is saying that when you apply the force, that the force applied will be equal to the momentum of the body, rate of change of the momentum in the body, and that the force will go along the path of the applied force. Now let me explain. First of all, let's understand the meaning of momentum. Momentum simply means the product of mass and velocity. The product of mass and velocity. So if you know the mass of a body and you know its velocity, you multiply two of them and that will give you the momentum of the body. So momentum, capital M, is equal to small m, which is mass, times by velocity, which is equal to mv. Now the rate of change of momentum means change of momentum, that is m mass times velocity, or mass times final velocity. If it is changing, if the momentum is changing, if the velocity is changing, it will move from initial velocity to final velocity. Let's call the initial velocity v, and the final velocity, let's call the final velocity v and the initial velocity u. Now mass of the body, we call it m. The mass does not change. The mass of a body does not change. So we can have that momentum is now equal to rate of change, means comparing that body or the momentum with time. So we are now going to have that m brackets, the velocity is changing from v to u over time, which is t. Now we know that acceleration a is equal to v minus u over t. Acceleration is equal to change of velocity times over time, which is v minus u over t. Now we can use this and substitute it in the equation for momentum, which is F equal to m v minus u over t. So if we use this to replace, if we use A to replace this, we are now going to have that force is equal to ma. So the formula for force is equal to ma, which is equal to mass times acceleration. Now example, if we have a body of mass 2 kilogram and the body is accelerating with 4 meter per second squared. Now we can calculate the force possessed by this body by multiplying the mass and the acceleration. That will give us 2 times 4, which is going to be 8. The unit of force is Newton, so it's going to be 8 Newton. So this is how to get the acceleration, the force from velocity and mass. And that is basically the Newton's second law of motion.